I hope you guys are well. It has been over a month since I've seen you guys. So I briefly caught up with some of the guys after or during class on Wednesday, and I hope that you've had some sort of Easter that you could enjoy in your clinical year, which I believe is going to roll on through to the summer. But we've got 3 sessions left with myself, so these things are going to be uploaded to your Blackboard. And what I'm going to plan on using this very short hour today will be a guide over some rehab for a very common presentation that you'll have, especially from anyone who does any running, and that is going to be recreational, so just like going out for a jog, up to professional runners, and that is heel pain, Achilles pain. And it's dovetails quite nicely with what we did last time, which is the patella or knee tendinopathy, persistent knee pain. And the fact that we spent a couple of sessions on that means that we can get to much more about just the specifics around the Achilles than some of the general principles. But hopefully you guys have been building your general person-centered approach around everything that you've done through this year. It's going to continue on developing hopefully after you graduate as well. And it is so that's what I'm going to be going through today. And I will upload this booklet, which is a patient guide from Mr. Malliaras himself, for patients to understand and get the important concepts that we understand from the evidence on management. Gives them some advice around how common is Achilles tendinopathy, what is the clinical features, what does imaging tell us, is it helpful, and again, these are going to be all the things that you're going to want to make sure that you can answer, because I would always encourage a person. If someone asked me for there's some questions at the end here. Someone asked me for, Luke, how do I know if a healthcare professional is worth their salt for me to invest in going to see them, whether they're a chiro, whether they're a physio, whether they're a medical doctor? And this would be, I'd say, okay, you've got heel pain, I'm going to send you this booklet, and there's some questions in here. And if you go to your healthcare professional, if they can answer those, then they're a good place for you to be putting your trust in someone who's going to help you back to the things that you need to do. There's some things that are modifiable, and there's some things that are non-modifiable. So things like your age, things like other comorbid diseases that people may have. We can't necessarily do too much about those, but we can do things about our weight and things that cause global inflammation, and obesity is one of those. And that's something that is an interesting component of Achilles management that's generally quite, or tendinopathy, persistent pain in general, whether it's low back pain, whether it's knee, shoulder, or Achilles. But the carrying extra body weight in body fat is something that is where lifestyle design and programming prescription becomes very helpful. Things like training errors and surface, that's going to be where a lot of people are going to be wanting a quick fix for it again, and that's when we can illustrate the importance that load management is probably the basis to how this has happened. Being able to touch into their fears and their concerns, their stresses, healing times, psychological factors that, again, I like to call sensitizing factors. And here are generally the different options that people will often see. Well, I'll just back off and I'll just wait for this to settle down, and often that just causes unnecessary weakness and is a waste of time. Passive treatment, so a lot of people will be going straight for injections, going for shockwave therapy, going for some sort of manual therapy, and these might give someone some short-term relief, but don't get you back to being able to recondition tissues in the medium to long term. The research is clear on that. And therapeutic exercise that is graded personalized, and person-centered. So it has that psychosocial component weaved in, is our best bet. And that's what you guys, we've worked really hard this year to make sure that you guys have the capacity to at least be developing those tools to get people towards self-management. Because does anybody here have any idea around the sort of time frame that we might be looking at for Achilles tendinopathy? Is this something that I would expect to settle and be completely gone in a couple of weeks? Yeah, it's a nice time frame, Lewis. I think 3 months is the absolute minimum that we are going to be looking at, but then that's consistent as to whether, if we're looking at back pain as well. That's why the GLAD trial, it's why persistent, the best research around persistent back pain takes us past those 12 weeks. It's why I personally settle on 12-week programs as opposed to anything shorter, unless it is called for with the individual. And with Achilles tendinopathy, 3 months is really the absolute minimum. Yeah, that's I've read research, similar research as well, and you know, with the shoulder, frozen shoulder, really an interesting syndrome where we could be looking up to 30 months, and that is just a really harrowing bit of information to be able to give a person who's maybe experiencing the clinical syndrome of the frozen shoulder, but being able to give people realistic timeframes, it prevents the unnecessary searching for passive fixes at, often, you know, when people are searching for surgery, you know, enormous risks, enormous costs. So being able to give people the realistic time frame that it will take is so important. So if we're going to be talking about something that's 3, 6+ months, you know, people need to develop self-management skills. They need to be able to progress their exercises, because they're going to be spending a shitload more of that time away from us than with us. I think, and it's my personal belief and my personal experience around how I've set up my practice, is that you can make a good business model harnessing self-management through these presentations, because they last 3, 6, 12 months. We can have really graded, progressive programs that take people over that period of time, and they can use us as a resource. They can use us for being able to come and say, so should I change my footwear? Is there any adjunctive care that I could be benefiting from? So things like strapping, things like maybe some needles or whatever manual toolbox we have, but that has to be, you know, I'm not anti those things, but those things have to be the adjunct, not the main meal. And that's really, I think, where the balance is often missed. So these are the questions that I'll get somebody to say, take this to your healthcare professional, and if they can't answer these, or if it looks like they're bullshitting, then go somewhere else. When and why? So is that person interested in your recent history of exercise and training? That's what I would be wanting to say. The healthcare professional should be asking about your load management. How does my pain respond to load? They should be testing your load. They should be seeing what your tolerance is. How many of the risk factors do I meet? So that's the modifiable and the non-modifiable things we saw earlier at the start. There is kinetic chain factors. So there is a biomechanical component that is probably worth assessing and having some tests to be able to do that. And then things like fears and worries. So they've got to be able to address the person connected as well. Tailored, there's lots of ways to be able to progress, and we're just going to have a look at, I'm actually going to share, you know, physio tutors have got some awesome videos that I was in the process of making, but they've just done it better. So I'm going to share some of those today. And there is an enormous landscape of affordances that we have with progressing exercises, even though there are some really nice targeted ones for the Achilles that I think are worth sharing with you guys to be able to have confidence in prescribing, even if you don't have access to them in your facility you work out of. Progressing load gradually and safely, the metaphor that I would hope you guys come up with using is the envelope of function. I would want you to be able to draw that with your patient so you can see what their training history was for high load, for low load, more frequency, and just how they're going to gradually build this, because it's going to take a number of months. And that's a skill I often have to work really hard with people, because most people do not have the skill set for tracking what they do. So then when they're guessing, I'm guessing, everybody's guessing. So a journal, whether it is a notebook or whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, I'm still trying to find the best way to be able to track my own training, but probably missing the point in the fact that I am tracking in some way. Things like rating of perceived exertion. Paul's just shared recently an editorial from Tim Gabbert on the benefits of local tissue conditioning and sport-specific conditioning. So if we're a runner, we need to be conditioning running, but we also need to be conditioning specific tissues through targeted things like calf raise. And the balance of those two is super important. Being able to track the response to load is important, because again, when you guys are working with acceptable pain models, sometimes the flare will be when they're with you in person, but sometimes it will be up to 72 hours after the session. So that needs to be in some way reported so that we can get that back from our patient. I don't have any control over people joining, I'm afraid. All I can say is that we're recording this so that the entire thing will go on Blackboard. But please pass on my apologies. I am not stopping her coming in. Monitoring pain, monitoring activity. Is this going to work? Lifestyle for the win. Again, we've been using pain neuroscience education and various ways to help prescribe that, and patients. So that's a workbook that, again, if you become familiar with that, I will want, that's something that I would have benefited from enormously had someone given that to me a few years ago. So you guys will have that. Loading programs, share. Okay, so we're going to go into my Google presentation. So I can't see our collaborative screen now because I'm on this Google tab, but I can hear if messages pop into the chat. So at any point, pop a question in. If we get sidetracked and we don't get through it all, then so be it. That's the balance with these short sessions. So unless I get a question, I will try and cover and share some videos and tutorials and things that I think are going to be really useful for you to work with yourself for your Achilles, or someone who comes and asks for your advice around it. Okay, loading, always super important. I put a video out yesterday around the pain in my feet that I went out in the beacons last week, which I tried to picture that same adaptation going on when I could see my feet getting sore, but then a few days later getting harder, is what I like to think is happening when I'm loading up my shoulder, when I'm loading up my back, or in this case the Achilles, to be able to drive that adaptation. Imagery is important, and our thoughts and our what we see becomes our movements. Acceptable pain, mild and moderate, we have to be able to work with that. Severe, we've got to back off. So the framework that we used with what I adapted to the patella was based on Igor Sancho's pain-based progressive hopping program, which is an Achilles program for the problematic Achilles. Now, this is what these 4 levels I created was based on. So you've got an entire program just getting that Igor Sancho paper and following these four levels. Level 1 isometrics, level 2 your heavy slow resistance plus your isometrics, level 3 isometrics, isotonics plus some high and fast loading, level 4 all the way up into high and fast loading for single leg hops, plus then getting running going. These are all based on some of your hop tests to be able to say, is this pain acceptable or not? So that is a program for a loading program that is for training up to 5 days a week, there for you to be able to have as a guide straight off the bat. And that is something that I use for frameworks of loading, because again, remember, there is not a gold standard loading program that is better than others. So what does that tell us? We need to be able to have options of loading programs to make it progressive in a way that we can for the person in front of us. Let's not be paralyzed by that. So who gets it? As I said before, it is going to be people who run. Anybody involved, whether it's sports, whether it is someone who is sedentary, just getting going with a couch to 5K, or whether it's someone that does serious running, ultra endurance, Ironman type stuff. We all are not immune to getting Achilles pain. And once we have got Achilles pain, we've exceeded our tolerance for adaptability. What aggravates it? It will be palpation in the mid Achilles, so we can grip the Achilles in that point where it's right in the middle of it, all the way down to the insertion onto the calcaneus. Where the most provocative place is whether it's going to be maybe defined as an insertional one or a mid portion. Where the patella was really aggravated by running downhill. With this, we have the opposite. Going uphill is going to be worse, and that's going to be largely because we're coming into more progressively deeper ranges of dorsiflexion, which is going to cause compression on the underside of the Achilles. So this position that I've shown here, which is dorsiflexion, I could only dream of. But if this Achilles here is painful, then this deep stretch position is going to be compressing the underside, pissing it off more. So that's why running uphill, or even stretching for that matter, is going to be probably not the best suggestion for someone who has heel pain or Achilles pain. And that's a question that a lot of people will have, because the intuitive go-to thing that people will do is, my Achilles hurts, stretch it. Probably not the best idea. So plyometrics are going to be a higher fast load, particularly hopping compared to last session with the knee. The hopping is the knee dominant ones, where you've got the counter movement jumps. With these ones, it's going to be where your knees are locked and you're doing more like pogo jumps. That's what's going to really bias and load the Achilles. There will be a change somewhere. So when you can get beyond what people's desires for potentially a quick fix are, the underpinning theme will be that we've exceeded our tolerance somewhere. Starting hill sessions or speed sessions. Just from a personal level, I went through a year of managing my patellar tendinopathy, heavy slow resistance, all the way up to increasing the intensity and returning to running. And in my first sprinting session, had a one-off event that set off my Achilles that gave me fucking pain for about a few months. Frustrating, but can I explain it? Yes, a spike in loading, one-off in a speed session, is what gave me my Achilles issue. People will have just got going from a long period off. Remember, envelope of function is this adaptable thing. So just because you've trained a lot in the past doesn't mean that your capacity, you hear coaches will say, starting off in the training programs, this is just about getting it into your legs. A little bit like when I went out walking last weekend, it was enough to just try and get it into my feet. Nothing to do with fitness, nothing to do with anything else, just the connective tissue in my feet to be able to tolerate and harden appropriately. I did that last weekend. I'm going out and doing the Welsh 3 Peaks tomorrow. So hopefully the adaptation that I caused last week just on the connective tissue was a little bit of a break-in phase. Arguably, it's still a bit of a step up on the amount of time walking for me tomorrow. So if that causes me a problem, can I explain it? Yes, we're all human and we all want to get on with stuff. But this is where, when you can look at someone's history, there will be something that explains why your Achilles is niggling. We will have a little watch of this test because I'm not sure that you will be familiar with it. And if you are, nice little review.
Now I'm going to demonstrate the Royal London Hospital test for Achilles tendinopathy. Get our very own assessment ebook and mobile app. Links are in the video description. Hi and welcome to Physio Tutors. Achilles tendinopathy is a common injury seen in sporting populations. Traditionally, the diagnosis of Achilles tendinopathy is based on clinical presentation and history taking, revealing Achilles tendon pain that's usually worse in the morning and that warms up during activity. Oftentimes, patients report a sudden spike in activity that overloaded the tendon. Reimann et al. From 2014 reviewed the literature on tests for Achilles tendon pathology and found a pooled sensitivity of 54% and a specificity of 86%. As the included studies were of mixed risk of bias and on the basis of the found values, the clinical value is at most moderate. To conduct the test, the patient can be in prone lying position with the foot over the edge of the bench. The ankle is in neutral or slight plantar flexed position while you palpate the Achilles tendon for tenderness. In mid-portion tendinopathy, tenderness is usually seen 2 to 5 centimeters from the calcaneal insertion, or right at the calcaneus in insertional tendinopathy. The patient is then asked to move the ankle into maximum dorsiflexion. The tendon is then again palpated at the previously found tender spot. Then the patient moves the foot into maximum plantar flexion and the tender spot is again palpated. The test is considered positive for Achilles tendinopathy if the pain on the tender spot initially found is absent in the maximally dorsiflexed position. The authors have no explanation as to why the pain disappears on maximal tension of the tendon. Okay, if you're interested, you can watch our video.
Yeah, that's the Royal London Hospital test, which we looked at a version of that for the patella as well. And as he concluded at the end of that video, the symptoms reduce when you take the tendon into tension, and they, which is in dorsiflexion. So, no explanation or clear explanation as to why that's the case, because when you load that up and take them into dorsiflexion, then they tend to be provoked. Is it to do with the difference with it being passive versus active? Potentially. So, useful test to be able to know how to be able to do. There's another one I've linked here to physio tutors, which is called an ARC test, and a video where there is some differentials for things like nerve entrapments and other things that can present in around the ankle, which is good to be aware of. Okay, so we need to be able to answer that question when a patient comes to us as to what their response to load is, because whilst it might not initially be obvious where they've exceeded their load, we can test to be able to see what their load tolerance is here today. Okay, so these are the compression tests, or the heavy slow resistance calf raise tests that we're going to do incrementally. Don't do all of them. We do one, then the next one, because each one adds a compressive load to the tendon. So we would do a bit of walking, maybe that's enough, and they are not able to tolerate any more. Most people can go to some sort of calf raise, and that is going to be a two leg on the floor, then a step, which is going to bring us into a little bit more compression due to the more increased range of movement. Then we would go to a bent leg calf raise, then we would go to a bent leg calf raise with increasing a little bit of speed or load. So each one of those ramps up to up the loading gradient of loading the Achilles. And if we can get through those, we go on to the high and fast loading, which is the hops. And we're not going to spend too much time on that because we did look at that with the knee. I will share the calf raise testing, because this order of tests here is what you're going to want to be able to know and to be able to do. Or maybe even I'd have that if I know someone's coming in with Achilles, I'd make sure I'd review this and know that I had them written down in order to go through if I didn't know them off by heart.
When we're load tolerance testing the Achilles or the calf, we have a series of progressively more challenging calf raises that we're going to want to put someone through to find the highest level of test that they can tolerate before aggravating their symptoms. Okay, so when we do these tests, this is less about any functional performance, and it's exactly as I just said, they're all about finding their highest level of pain provocation, because that test then becomes our mark for progression further down the line. Okay, so the first one we're going to do is going to be a double leg calf raise. And when we do this, we're going to get someone to have their legs locked, and they're going to come up onto their big toes and back down. They can do it simply on the floor. If I come to the side here, we're going to come up all the way to as high as we can and back down, up onto the big toe, not rolling out. That's going to be consistent across all of these calf tests, and try not to come forward too much to have mechanical leverage. So sometimes often helpful to have a wall in front to be able to use as a reference point for not falling forward, and it helps with balance if someone's struggling with that. But I would do 3 or 4 reps there, and if that's okay, then we would rest and go on to the next one, which is going to be going where most people can get, is going to be straight onto a step. So I've got a couple of 20-kilo plates here, and this is going to increase the ankle through dorsiflexion and plantarflexion that we can do at the ankle. Okay, so the exact same thing, using a wall to be able to check not falling forwards. Feet are going to go together, and I can come up for 1, down for 1, up for 1, down for 1, and do 3 or 4 tests and see if that provokes symptoms in the Achilles. If we can get past that one after 3 or 4 reps and it's okay in terms of pain, we can do the same thing in single leg. Okay, so in the setup on the step, we would get our hands on the wall so that we can try and make sure we're not going too far forward, get our edge of our foot on the edge of the step so that we can get into full plantar flexion. From here, come on as high as we can with the big toe, down for 1, up for 1, down for 1, up for 1, down for 1, up for 1, down to full range, and on both sides. If we can get past that, we can try the same thing in a bent leg position. Okay, so that's going to be getting into the same setup on the step, bend the knee to about 90 degrees or so, and from here, come up into full plantar flexion onto the big toe, down, full plantar flexion. So the movement up and down is coming from the heel, the knee isn't changing. But again, 1 second up, 1 second down, 1 second up, 1 second down, 1 second up, 1 second down, and again, noting, can we reproduce pain, or have we found acceptable pain tolerance? Now, maybe we've got through all of those and we still haven't been able to find load tolerance. So in that instance, we can add a couple of variables where we can either add the load, add an external load to the single leg calf raise, or add speed. Okay, so if I was going to do the single leg one and I'm going to try and add speed, I'm going to do it into this position, down and straight up, down as fast as I can, straight up, down as fast as I can, straight up, down as fast as I can, straight up. Boom. And just the addition of speed could find our load tolerance. Equally, holding onto a weight, I've just got a sandbag here, it could be a kettlebell, could be a rucksack. I'm doing the same thing and seeing if, with a normal tempo, just the addition of weight aggravates and finds our load tolerance, which we will generally in Achilles tendinopathies. And the next level beyond these would be going on to the more, even faster provocation tests of high and fast load, which would be our hopping.
So if we would have had the fortune of being able to be together in person, I would want to see the accuracy that you're able to all go around and actually do those tests on yourself, because when people do calf raise tests, they generally find all sorts of ways to be able to achieve repetitions, which when you keep someone strict, then they are able to do far less than they're actually able to do. But at this point, it's still about symptoms, not about someone's endurance or someone's strength. Should someone get through all these load provocation tests, then you'll have some of these people, but there's still acceptable amounts of pain, then it would be about activity-specific load tolerance, okay? So some people will say, my Achilles issue doesn't come on until I've done about, I had someone come to me the other day and they said, I get this Achilles pain, and it comes on almost like clockwork when I do 10,000 steps per day. Okay, so there's an amount, there's a volume that it requires to exceed where the Achilles then has reached its tolerance. And that's, again, why having some way of tracking away from us, whether it is something like your smartwatch or whether it is a journal, it is important. When I go running, it's not until I hit the 7 mile mark, and then when I hit the 7 mile mark, then it comes on. And that is, again, we're not going to be able to do that in the clinic unless you create a particularly bespoke way of working, which, again, that's actually how I work. But if you do that, then you can do it with them. Otherwise, if you're doing it just in a clinic, then you will need to be able to get people to track it away. This was the MyJump app that we looked at. You can buy that and keep it on your mobile, and that gives you a little bit of data around ground contact, etc. But this is your stiff-legged hopping where the knees are locked, and we're looking for short ground contact time, and this is a very ankle biased type of hopping. The highest loading version that you're going to get on the Achilles is going to be this single leg version, which is going to be, by the time someone's able to do 20 of these, that's where we're looking at egocentral's work and saying they're good to be running. This Achilles now needs to be sport specifically loaded back in. This is a questionnaire that you can use for the Achilles, and it's an adaptation on the patella one that I shared. It will be, you can Google it. I've got it linked in here, but you can search for that. Maybe you want to make a little note of that, or when you get the PDFs from Blackboard, you'll be able to Google that, and that's something that you can use as an outcome measure. But here's what the kinetic chain assessment might look like biased for the Achilles presentation, because again, hopefully you're not going to be just looking at the Achilles when someone has persistent Achilles pain, because there could be that the reason that they have Achilles pain is because they're drastically inefficient or weak through their quads, which means that they're something upper level of the or upstream has maybe had an injury, they've had a niggle, and they've changed the loading, which means that's why their Achilles is flared up. So being able to, again, this is not too dissimilar to the knee version we looked at, but the priority has shifted. Okay, so with the local muscle tendon unit of the Achilles, we want to be able to use a bent leg calf raise, do a 6 rep max, and we can do a straight leg calf raise for endurance. We'll have a quick look at those now. And we can also do inversion and eversion. Pete Malliaras will use a banded way of doing that like this, which is, I think, his best attempt at trying to come up with some sort of test, which is still a manual muscle test here, and that's everything that we're probably trying to get away from. So if you're going to do that, 30 seconds in inversion, 30 seconds in eversion, and ramp up to see how much resistance somebody can tolerate and probably compare to their other side. The posterior chain, so looking at the hamstring complex, the bridge ups are something we looked at with the knee, and being able to have a level of that. Glute med for abduction, and for quad function we can use a leg extension or a wall sit, or we do have some normative data around sit to stand, probably more relevant for our elderly or sedentary folks. How many sit to stands can you do in 30 seconds? That does have some, and I've got the data in here for what someone might strive to be able to do that through the age groups. But I did mention this little story because a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm a chiropractor. I don't, it's not my scope to be talking about Achilles pain when people are, they're not going to be coming to me for that." Pete Malliaras tells a funny story where one of his patients came to him and said, "I went to see my podiatrist for a foot problem, and she suggested that I put my body weight on the Smith's machine and do calf raises. Can you believe it?" And as it turned out, that podiatrist went and did a CPD event with Pete Malliaras, because she works with feet and she sees heel pain probably more than other people. And it turned out that she went on the course with Pete. So she took evidence, that podiatrist took the evidence of tendinopathy and applied it through her scope as a podiatrist. And I can't see any reason why we shouldn't be doing the same. So the seated calf raise is probably not the most glorious exercise. You know, you're not going to, when the gym's open on Monday, you're probably not going to all be sprinting in to fight for the bent leg calf raise machine. But when it comes to the powerhouse of running, the soleus, which doesn't cross the knee, is absolutely fundamental, probably more so than the calf for our plantar flexion. And that's why it is a really useful and helpful exercise for getting in and rehabilitating the Achilles. And often when you put someone onto the calf raise test, someone who's got an Achilles issue, you get them to try and do a bodyweight standing calf raise test, and they're 75 kilograms in body weight. They are not able to tolerate it. Yet when you put them in a bent leg position like this and you put 75 kilograms onto their knee, they are able to tolerate it. So it seems to be a position that we can get heavy slow resistance in earlier. And Ego Sancho, the paper that we are using as a bit of a guide through this, has produced some targets that seem to be suggesting that being able to do 1.4 times body weight for 6 reps might have some protective amounts of strength. That's remains to be seen as to whether that's going to be repeated, but it is a nice target which is motivating for people to be able to work towards. And there's lots of ways to be able to create a bent leg calf raise. I'm going to play this video here of doing it with plates so that I know that you could give it out in some format without people having access to anything other than some weight plates. And then we'll have a look at some creative examples that other people have used.
Bent leg calf raise, which is a really helpful training drill for building up our calf and our Achilles, in particular if our Achilles is painful. Now, as long as you've got a bench and access to plates, this is how I'd like you to have a go at setting up. Some people find it a little bit awkward, and it will be until you get used to it. Okay, but as long as you stack up your plates next to you here, you should be able to slide them on and then slide them off. As a goal, we're looking for being able to do heavy slow resistance for about 1.4 for 6 reps for about 1.4 times our body weight. So that's a goal that we want to work to being able to do before we're really doing the running. And I'm currently just about 100 kilos, so 1.4 of that single leg is going to be 140. So I'm currently working on, so these are 25 plates, and so 4 of those is 100, so I'm going to slide them on into this position here. Best off sliding them on onto 2 legs. Get ourselves organised and then shift over onto 1. If I put this on here, that's 110. Then I'm going to shift it over onto, I'm going to be able to manhandle the weight. Depending on the type of plate that you use, usually it might have some awkward lines, etc. on it, but I want to be able to shift the weight then so that it sits on our single leg. This other leg can just stabilise us wherever we want to be, and then we want to be able to get our knee forward of our toes. We want to be able to get the calf raise in the line of drive that we're going to have through a running stride. That's what makes this exercise possibly a superior one to being able to do it on a machine. Although that is a good option as well if that's all you have access to. Okay, so then I'm going to come up for 3, 2, 1, all the way up onto my big toe, down for 3, 2, 1, 0. Up, 3, 2, 1. Resist the temptation to lean back. Keep that line of drive, knee over toe, up onto big toe. 1, 3, 2, 1, 0. 3, 2, 1, 0. gets really intense once you find that level. 6 reps, shift the weight back onto 2 legs, and you can have a little rest there if need be. Over onto the other side. Now I'm in control of it. Get myself end range of ankle dorsiflexion, and perform heavy slow resistance reps. Six reps each side, back into this position, and then we can safely get our plates off us, start our clock, and that's how I will train my bent legs, what I'm currently working on with my Achilles, until I'm able to do that with 140 kilograms. I can also have a step underneath my foot to slightly change the range of movement of the calf raise.
So I wanted to be able to share the setup there because it took me a bit of time to fuck about and get that as a setup, because I wanted to be consistent over the course of the months that I was training that, and having variations to be able to use Smith's machines, having to use machines, bent leg calf machines is helpful, but I wanted to be able to track my progressive overload over time. Okay, so that's your 3030 tempo, and that's your setup for bent leg calf raise. Okay, a straight leg calf raise. This is another one that people will tend to not be able to do accurately, and if you can't do these and coach these strict, then people will cheat and they will have scores that are a million miles away from the normative data that we know people can achieve when it's done strict. So I'm going to roll this because, again, if I had a lab here with you guys, I guarantee you I would go around and you do a calf raise test, and then when we do it properly, you'd get about a third of what you think you can get. So your patience will be the same. So I'm going to play this so that we can see that we want to be able to coach people not to sway, to use mechanical leverage, to be not rolling out onto the little toe, and to be able to have a range check for keeping people true moving overhead.
Right, when we're testing calf and Achilles function, and we want to get an accurate measure of the endurance of that function, we need to be able to do a single leg or a calf raise test. Okay, and there's a lot of ways that our body will cheat, and people will do a lot of reps if we don't make it strict. And when we do make it strict, which is what the research or the normative data we have on these for age groups show, that people generally will not be able to do too many of these. Okay, so we're going to always take someone through the technique and give them a few goes to be able to perform.
In fact, what I'm going to do, as I'm aware that we're all sat down, is I'm going to play this, watch these points, and then you are going to do a single leg calf raise test on yourself. I will give a minute after this. So watch the coaching here now, and then you're all going to have a go at doing a single leg calf raise test, because you don't need anything to be able to have a little practice. Okay.
The technique with a rest, and then we go to a tempo of 1 second up and 1 second down until we have reached the point that we can't maintain that tempo, we can't get up. Okay, so I'm going to use Callie as an example, where we're going to have Callie next to the wall, and she's going to have her one hand overhead. Now Callie's small enough that she's able to do this in here. If it was me, I'd be hitting the ceiling, so I'd need to go outside or have another way of being able to check. But what this enables Callie to do is to be able to reach up as high as she can and be able to reach that same point with each rep. Okay, and from here, she's going to keep the leg straight, and then she's going to take this leg into 90 degrees here, and then we're going to come up onto the big toe for 1 second, sliding up the wall, and then down for 1 second. Up for 1 second, down for 1 second. Keep going for 5 or 6 reps. And what a lot of people will do is they will, as you come this time, lean forward, they will come forward because that will make it mechanically easier. So we want to be able to correct people and get them. If we can get people focusing on their hand going up into this vertical plane, then that's going to help keep us true. We want to make sure that we're coming up onto the big toe, have a rest. So tie yourself out, coming up onto the big toe because we will want to then roll onto the outside of the feet when we can't maintain range. Okay? How was that?
Okay.
When they're done strict, people will generally do a lot less than they would expect. And if you feel good, then we're going to try and go at sticking to a tempo of 1 second up, 1 second down. Do you want to do that leg or do you want to do the other one?
The other one.
Turn around and face the other way there. So from this one now, so you're going to try and stay strict with all of those cues. This leg's going to stay up so that we can keep a truly single leg. And as soon as you're ready, you go up for 1, and that's big toe. 2, 3, so that's 1 second. Top, bottom. Are we on?
I don't know. I didn't count. I haven't counted.
So someone would be needing to count, and this is the speed that we maintain the speed, and we would find a point that we can't go any further. And that would then we would want to be able to have what that score is for the left leg, also for the right leg. And if someone wasn't able to do a single leg half raise, we would do the exact same thing with 2 legs, 2 feet.
So you have got 2 minutes. You've just got the cues there yourself. I want you to be able to put yourself into getting a true test as best as you can, and then we're going to have a look at some normative data. We can come down to your age group and see how you marry up. You are going to have a wall next to you, and you're going to use a strict straight arm overhead so that you're truly a test. If I was with you, every rep to the metronome, you would be hitting the same point that you can see on your hand on the wall. And if you can't hit that, the test is stopped. Okay, your other leg is out in front of you at 90 degrees, so you're in like a running stride type position. And I'm going to start the clock, so get yourself wherever you are going to do it. I'm going to bring us back. It's 10:48 at 11 o'clock, and you will all have a number to be able to look at the normative data. Okay, go. Right, we should be somewhere near. Where are you guys at? Any numbers to be shared into the chat box for what you got? Remember, this is not a comparison between people. It's just to try and make things a little interactive for you to compare up against the normative data, which we will put on the screen now. Thanks, Si. Any other numbers? Again, this is the challenge of online teaching. I have absolutely no idea if anyone can hear me or if anyone's doing it. 125, lovely. These numbers are going to be helpful for you in a second. I'm only asking you to do one side, guys, purely for brevity of time, because we're not going to get through this whole lecture anyway as it is, but you will have the programming, etc., and the presentation uploaded. 27. Okay, cool. So you've all had 3 minutes there. I will let you have a look here at your age down the side and male or female, left side versus right side. So if you are in your 20s, this is a test where you are able to say that we are able to get 37 if we are a male, or 29 when we are a female. If we are in our 60s, which I don't think any of you guys are, then we're looking at 19, 20 if we're a male, 18, 19 if we're a female here. So I know that when I do that accurately and strict, I actually get about 25 as well. So that's often a very humbling exercise for people when we truly isolate their calf tendon complex with this test, and that's a really helpful little chart to be aware of with the normative data. Here's, as I said, that normative data around some sit to stand testing for your quad. So if how many sit to stands can you do in 30 seconds? Generally over the age of 60, women should be able to do 15, men shouldn't be, but typically women can do 15, men can do 17, and that goes down as we get a little bit older. The leg extension and the wall sit may be more appropriate for more athletic or athletes that we're working with. So these are going to be the things that we're going to need to load manage. The dorsiflexion to the range of movement, that is an issue. So with the bent leg calf raise there, as I showed you, knees past toe, if that's an issue, then you bring the knee back so that you find a range that someone is able to tolerate. Reduce the running volume by 50 to 100%, whatever it takes to be able to bring symptoms acceptable. And other stuff specific for the Achilles will be potentially avoiding barefoot, so you're going out to dorsiflexion and prolonged standing. Things like heel wedges have been shown to help, but the cost of them is not important, and being custom built and a lot of money is not important either. So being able to offload and change the loading, change the symptomatic loading is a really helpful thing for people's symptoms to let things settle down, which they will if we find a way to be able to stop the provocative thing. But remember, wait and see approach we looked at before probably will cause unnecessary deconditioning. So being able to get your early resistance training in. Now, if we had longer time for this lecture, I'd play this video from the Physio Tutors, which is the Baxter 2021 paper, which has ranked 30 exercises from calf raises right the way up to the single leg hopping and everything in between for the rate of loading on the Achilles, to give you lots of ideas for how we could and where someone is on the loading continuum with their Achilles, It's a really nice video, lots of really short clips around the hopping options. Fully recommend that you watch that. And this is our load management bird's eye view again. Remember, stopping the stretch shortening cycle and building the heavy flow resistance up, whilst we then bring the stretch shortening cycle tolerance task back in. Okay, right the way up to return to sport. So they're going to be the things that are going to be provocative. There is a video by these guys again that is just literally explaining what I was making anyway, which was the Ego Sancho hop guided pain-based progressive program. So I recommend that you watch that. So use my presentation as a framework for your further study, I guess, is what I'm really suggesting. Here is some isometrics that we could do early on. This wall sit is Soleus wall sit is one that I will share because the others require a bit of kit, but this is where you get your shins vertical and you come up into maximum plantar flexion. And this is actually really intense. Again, if you don't let the heels or the foot roll out onto the little toe, and then we're looking for maximum holds there. Single leg is a progression on from double leg. And if someone's knee was finding it that they couldn't handle, or that was causing an unnecessary issue with the knee strength required there, then just put them a little bit closer to the wall. But this is my end range of plantar flexion. You can do this in mid-range, and just training in the top range is something that is probably worth a lot of people doing. It's where most people's deficit is when it comes to their calf strength. But that early intervention there, I've got an isometric hold here with a plate on my leg. I've got a Soleus hold on a leg press here, so bent leg calf press on a leg machine, and a standing single leg hold there. Here is some really creative variations that people made from Pete Malliaras' course, which is where they've found ways to use bags of rice, children, home contraptions to be able to get that load in through the Achilles. And that is probably normally okay up to about 50 or 60 kilos, but as you saw with my example, 1.4 times my body weight, 140 kilograms, probably going to want to get into a gym if you're working with someone like me, or someone who is looking for higher weights above 60 kilograms, unless they make one of these really fancy contraptions. But I thought that was a cool way to show that. This is another little setup I wanted to share you with. Someone's used a Smith's machine, which is going to be used a free weights machine squat rack instead of a Smith's machine. So that is a setup that I just wanted to be able to share. It's going to move a little bit more, but again, the problem solving nature of this is helpful. Here are the key early exercises that I think you should be aware of. The bent leg calf raise, which we've gone through with or without step, depending on whether they could tolerate it. Standing straight leg calf raise, toe press with a straight leg or a bent leg on a machine, and negative calf raises. So getting up with two legs and down with one can be a really helpful thing for a couple of reasons. It could be that somebody is not able to do a single leg calf raise. So then we have to be able to build up their strength, and it could be that they are post rupture. 1 second. Yeah, fine. Yeah, no problem. So that was the postman, such as the nature of working from home. But again, here's your programming for bent leg and straight leg, a little bit like we looked at there, a couple of different setups. Why not just use a bent leg calf machine? And the answer would be, if that's what you have access to, then it, of course, would be a good loading option. But why Pete Malliaras might say a bent leg calf raise is more representative of a running cycle. So if we can get our foot onto the floor and replicate the vectors and the forces, it carries across to the end goal of run a little bit better, and that's what the data is used in terms of numbers. So this is not an either or. I'd say that there's probably some reasons why we might use a bent leg raise as opposed to machine, but maybe we could do both. This is my gentleman, Mr. Dave Rapley, ruptured his Achilles, so he can't do a single leg calf raise. This is his Achilles here, so he is going to be building up his capacity, because we will get back to doing a single leg calf raise, but we're probably looking at 1 to 2 years in terms of the duration that might take. So we can use sets of concentric, eccentric, so up and down, and then finish off with eccentric, so we can increase the resistance for 2 additional sets. Or we can use a leg press where we're able to get about 20% body weight on a toe press, and over time we can build up towards body weight. So that would be what I'm doing with Mr. Rapley, and an example of programming applied to getting someone back to be able to do a single leg calf raise. End stage Achilles work, you've got loads of options in the videos that I've suggested from the physics tutors, and the variable hop that I shared with the knee, because the programming is also in here for being able to bias Achilles. This gradient gives us an idea around the amount of strength required on this bent leg before we should be running, and then the variable hop and up to competition. So rest of it there you're able to see, and we went through this at the beginning. So I hope that was helpful, and we did cover a lot of stuff there. I will upload it, and if you didn't hit your normative datas on your calf raise, then you've got some training to do for yourselves. But other than that, I will see you guys in a couple of weeks, where we will be going through the last 2 sessions with me, which will be on contemporary exercise prescription. So that's much more around the idea of cueing, around variable movement, around tasks, and that's going to be the final 2 sessions. So I look forward to seeing you guys then.